You ever find yourself lying awake at night, your mind racing with worries that never seem to end? Bills you haven't paid, decisions you haven't made, dreams that feel stuck just out of reach. And all the while, anxiety tightens its grip like a vice on your chest. What if I told you that there is a secret, a hidden key, a simple yet powerful principle that can set you free from all that worry? It's not in your ability, not in your strength, not in your planning. It's in one act of faith, giving it all to God and stopping the worry. That's the secret. That's the breakthrough that your heart has been craving. From the very beginning of Scripture, God has been calling his people to trust him. Psalm 5:22 tells us, cast your burden on the Lord and he will sustain you. He will never let the righteous be shaken. Notice it doesn't say try to carry your burden on your own. It doesn't say work harder, worry more, strategize endlessly. No, it says give it to God. Worry is nothing but a futile attempt to control what only God can. And when you finally surrender it to him, you unlock freedom you didn't know was possible. You ever notice how worry can grip your mind and refuse to let go? It's like a heavy weight pressing down on your chest, making everything feel urgent, impossible, and out of control. You replay problems over and over in your head, imagining every possible scenario and convincing yourself that if you just think harder, plan better, or try more, you can solve it. Yet, no matter how much effort you put in, the weight never lifts. Worry is futile. And here's the truth. It was never meant to solve anything. It was never designed to help you succeed or give you clarity. Its only purpose is to exhaust you, distract you, and keep you from experiencing God's peace. The secret is not in thinking more, planning more, or trying harder. The secret is in giving it to God and letting him handle it. When you surrender your burdens to God, something remarkable happens. Freedom begins to replace fear, peace begins to replace panic, and faith begins to replace frustration. From the very beginning, Scripture tells us that God wants us to cast our burdens on him. Psalm 5:22 says, cast your burden on the Lord and he will sustain you. He will never let the righteous be shaken. Notice the word cast. It's not a suggestion to hold it lightly or carry it a little. It's a command to throw it completely into God's hands. Worry is essentially our attempt to carry what we were never meant to carry alone. Think about that for a moment. Every sleepless night, every racing thought, every scenario you've imagined playing out in your head is proof that you're trying to do something God never asked you to do. And here's the beauty. When you finally hand it over, when you literally say in your heart, God, I can't handle this, but you can. A burden is lifted in a way that no human effort could ever achieve. The freedom you feel isn't just emotional, it's spiritual. Your heart is lighter, your mind is clearer. And suddenly the mountains that seemed insurmountable start to shrink before your eyes. Worry also steals your energy and robs you of joy. When you focus on what might go wrong, you're not focusing on what God is doing. Your attention goes to problems instead of solutions, to fear instead of faith. Imagine trying to run a race carrying a heavy backpack full of bricks. Every step is exhausting, every breath labored, every ounce of strength drained. That's exactly what worry does. It weighs you down, slows you down, and keeps you from moving forward in the direction God wants you to go. But when you give your burdens to God, it's like taking that backpack off your shoulders. You can breathe again. You can move again. You can live again. You can finally experience the freedom that God intended for you from the very beginning. Giving it to God also opens the door for his provision. Matthew 6:25-34 reminds us not to worry about food, drink, or clothing because God knows what we need and will provide. Worry attempts to control outcomes, but it cannot produce solutions. Only God can. Every second you spend obsessing over a problem is a second you are keeping God from moving freely in your life. But the moment you release it, the moment you surrender it, God can step in. Your burden is no longer something you are trying to solve. It becomes something God can handle, and his power is infinitely greater than yours. When you give it to God, you are not giving up. You are stepping into a higher strategy, one that surpasses human understanding. That's the secret many miss. Freedom doesn't come from effort. It comes from surrender. Many people struggle with the idea of surrender because worry feels like responsibility. We tell ourselves, if I don't worry, I won't care enough, I won't be prepared, I won't succeed. But true responsibility is not worry. It's trust. Worry assumes control belongs to you. Trust acknowledges that control belongs to God. Think about Daniel in the lion's den. Daniel didn't try to negotiate with the lions or reason his way out of danger. He trusted God. And because he surrendered completely, God delivered him. Every challenge you face, no matter how big or intimidating, can be approached in the same way. You take your action steps, but you stop carrying the burden alone. You give it to God and let him do the heavy lifting. That's where real freedom comes from. The act of giving it to God is both simple and profound. It begins with a decision, a moment in which you stop trying to carry the weight yourself. It continues as a practice repeated daily, moment by moment. Whenever worry arises, you can speak it aloud, say it in prayer, or simply choose it in your heart. God, this is yours. I will not carry it. Over time, that discipline transforms your mind. Your RST response shifts from fear to faith. Anxiety no longer rules your life. Peace becomes your default state. And the freedom that comes from surrender is not just temporary relief. It is a permanent shift in how you experience life, no matter the challenges you face. So the first keynote is clear. Worry is futile, but giving it to God brings freedom. It is a principle that, when applied, changes everything. It frees you from exhaustion. It restores your joy. It opens the door for God's provision, and it allows his peace to govern your heart. Every problem, every burden, every fear can be released into God's hands. You don't have to carry it. You don't have to solve it. You just have to trust. And in that trust, freedom is found, miracles unfold, and life becomes richer, lighter, and more full of hope than you ever imagined. You ever a way of confronting us with situations that make absolutely no sense. You can plan, prepare, and do everything right, and yet the outcomes are still confusing, unexpected, or even painful. It's in those moments, the moments when our logic fails, when our reasoning doesn't make sense, when our understanding reaches its limit, that God calls us to something far greater than comprehension, trust. Trust over understanding. This is the second key to unlocking a worry-free, faith-filled life. So often we think we must fully understand a situation before we can act or before we can release it. We demand answers, clarity, and certainty. And until we get them, we hold tightly to fear, doubt, and anxiety. But the truth is, God doesn't always give us all the answers up front. He doesn't always reveal the entire plan. What he asks for is trust, faith in his wisdom, faith in his timing, and faith in his goodness. Trust over understanding is the willingness to believe in God's plan, even when the path is unclear. It is the confidence that he is working behind the scenes, even when we cannot see it. Consider the story of Abraham. God promised him a child, yet years passed with no sign of fulfillment. Every logical argument in Abraham's mind said, this will never happen. Yet Abraham chose trust over understanding. He believed God, and because of that faith, the promise was fulfilled. Abraham's example shows us that trust is not blind. It is confident reliance on God's character, power, and faithfulness, even when circumstances appear impossible. When we insist on understanding first, we place the weight of the outcome on our own limited perspective. But when we choose trust first, we align ourselves with God's infinite wisdom. Trust over understanding also requires humility. It means acknowledging that our minds are limited and that God's perspective is eternal. Isaiah 55, 8-9 says, for my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. This passage reminds us that trying to comprehend God's plan is like a child trying to understand the mind of a genius. There is simply a level of knowledge and perspective that we do not possess. Trust is the bridge that connects our limited understanding with God's unlimited wisdom. It is the act of releasing control and embracing the fact that God sees the entire picture, knows the beginning and the end, and works all things together for good. Many of us struggle with trust because our minds want control. Worry is often the result of attempting to understand, predict, and manipulate outcomes. We say, if I can just figure this out, I'll be safe. If I can just plan this perfectly, nothing will go wrong. But life does not work that way. Trust is not control. Trust is surrender. It is the understanding that no matter how confusing, uncertain, or challenging life becomes, God is greater than the situation, and his power can transform it. Trust does not negate effort, responsibility, or action. It simply aligns those efforts with God's will rather than our own limited understanding. The beauty of trusting over understanding is the peace it brings. Anxiety and fear thrive on uncertainty because they demand answers before releasing control. But when you choose trust first, you free yourself from the paralyzing need to understand everything. Philippians 4:6-7 says, "Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God, and the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your." Many people misunderstand what it means to surrender to God. When they hear phrases like "give it to God" or "trust Him with your burdens," they assume it means doing nothing, sitting back and waiting for life to happen. They think surrender is passive, that it is synonymous with inaction. But the truth is the exact opposite. True surrender is not about avoiding effort. It is about aligning your actions with God's will, working faithfully, and leaving the outcome in His hands. Surrender is active, dynamic, and transformative. It does not free you from responsibility. It frees you from the paralyzing weight of worry while you act responsibly. When you understand this, you can move forward with confidence, even in the most challenging circumstances. Surrender and inaction are often confused because worry and anxiety can make us feel like we must control everything ourselves. We believe that if we just plan harder, push more, or do more, we can guarantee success. But this mindset is exhausting and ultimately futile. Worry tries to solve problems by human effort alone, whereas surrender acknowledges human limitations and invites God's guidance and power into the process. The key is realizing that action and surrender are not mutually exclusive. You can work diligently, plan strategically, and pursue your goals, but if you carry the burden alone, you will remain weighed down by fear. Giving the situation to God does not remove your responsibility to act. It removes the unnecessary pressure of trying to control the uncontrollable. Consider the story of Nehemiah in the Bible. When he learned that the walls of Jerusalem were broken, he did not sit back and hope someone else would fix them. He prayed, fasted, and sought God's guidance, but then he acted. He organized workers, created a plan, and rebuilt the walls step by step. Nehemiah's surrender did not mean passivity. It meant acknowledging that God was in control of the outcome while he faithfully worked in the present. His example shows that surrender is fully compatible with diligence. Action without surrender leads to exhaustion and frustration. Surrender without action leads to stagnation. But action with surrender brings clarity, strength, and divine favor. Surrender also protects your heart from anxiety during the process. When you act in alignment with God's guidance, you can do so with confidence, knowing that the outcome is not entirely dependent on your ability. You are responsible for your steps, but not for the results. This mindset is liberating. It allows you to pour your energy into what you can influence while releasing fear of what you cannot. Every situation in life, whether a relationship struggle, a financial challenge, or a personal dream, requires your participation. You must take initiative, but you must also release the weight of controlling the results. That is the essence of faith-filled action, doing your part and trusting God to do His. The danger of misunderstanding surrender as inaction is that it can lead to passivity or stagnation. Some people here give it to God and interpret it as an excuse to avoid responsibility. But God never calls us to inaction. He calls us to partnership where our obedience, effort, and diligence meet His wisdom and power. James 2:17 reminds us that faith without works is dead. Genuine surrender does not replace effort with laziness. It replaces stress and anxiety with trust and peace. It allows you to work with energy, clarity, and confidence because you are no longer burdened by fear. You are free to move forward boldly, even when the path is uncertain. Another key aspect of surrender is that it keeps your focus on what truly matters. When you try to control every detail, your attention becomes scattered and your heart is weighed down by unnecessary pressure. But when you surrender, you prioritize your actions according to God's guidance and focus on the steps you are meant to take. Worry disappears because you are no longer trying to manage everything yourself. Your energy is spent wisely on purposeful action, not on futile attempts to micromanage outcomes. Surrender sharpens your focus, channels your effort, and opens your heart to divine guidance and provision. Surrender also builds resilience. Life is unpredictable and challenges will come regardless of your planning. When you act without surrender, setbacks can feel devastating because you assume total responsibility for the results. But when you act in surrender, setbacks become opportunities for growth and lessons in trust. You understand that God is working behind the scenes. And even when things do not unfold exactly as you imagined, He is still faithful. Surrender allows you to keep moving forward with hope, confidence, and peace, no matter the obstacles. In practical terms, surrender means starting each day by giving your burdens, concerns, and plans to God. It means asking for guidance before making decisions, taking steps in faith, and letting go of the stress of controlling the outcome. It means combining prayer with action, faith with effort, and trust with diligence. It is a partnership between your responsibility and God's providence. When you understand that surrender does not mean inaction, every task becomes an opportunity to practice faith. Every challenge becomes an opportunity to trust, and every outcome becomes a testament to God's power and goodness. Ultimately, surrender is freedom. It frees you from the chains of worry, from the burden of trying to control everything, and from the exhaustion of carrying your life alone. But freedom does not come from doing nothing. It comes from doing everything you can while trusting God with what you cannot control. It is faith in action. It is trust in motion. And it is the secret to living a life of peace, joy, and purpose, no matter what challenges you face. Surrender does not mean inaction. It means trust-driven action. It means working faithfully while letting God handle the results. It means moving boldly in obedience and releasing anxiety about outcomes. And when you live this way, you discover that the power of God can work through your efforts in ways you could never imagine, bringing breakthroughs, miracles, and a peace that surpasses all understanding. Have you ever noticed how worry has a way of stealing your happiness without actually solving anything? It creeps into your mind like a thief in the night, silently robbing you of peace, joy, and clarity. You may be surrounded by blessings already present in your life, yet anxiety blinds you to them. You focus so intensely on what could go wrong, what you don't have, or what you fear might happen, that you miss the beauty and the provision God has already placed around you. Worry is not just an emotional burden. It is a spiritual thief. It hijacks your thoughts, drains your energy, and keeps you from receiving the blessings God is ready to pour into your life. Recognizing this truth is the first step toward liberation. The moment we worry, we shift our focus from God's power and provision to our own perceived inadequacies. We tell ourselves that if we can just control outcomes, life will be okay, yet the effort we put into controlling what only God can control becomes fruitless. This misplacement of focus weakens our faith, leaving us trapped in a cycle of fear and frustration. Worry convinces us that we are one, that we must carry the weight ourselves, and that our efforts alone determine the outcome. But God's word is clear. When we trust Him, we no longer need to rely on our limited understanding. We no longer need to obsess over what might happen. By continuing to carry anxiety in our hearts, we are inadvertently blocking the flow of God's blessings, because worry creates a barrier between faith and the miraculous. Consider the parable of Martha and Mary in Luke 10. Martha was busy, anxious, and worried about many things, while Mary sat at Jesus' feet. Jesus said that Mary had chosen the better part. Martha's worry did not change reality or fix any problems. It only consumed her energy and distracted her from receiving the blessing that was right in front of her. Worry, no matter how sincere or well-intentioned, steals time, focus, and the ability to fully experience God's presence. When our hearts are consumed with anxiety, we fail to notice the miracles unfolding around us. We fail to appreciate the small victories and the divine guidance already present. The joy that could uplift our spirit is replaced with tension, and the blessings that could enrich our lives remain unseen. Worry also affects our physical and emotional health. It creates tension in the body, clouds the mind, and leads to sleepless nights. When you are constantly preoccupied with what-ifs and worst-case scenarios, your mind cannot rest and your spirit cannot flourish. God intended for us to live with peace and joy, but worry sabotages that plan. Philippians 4:6-7 reminds us not to be anxious about anything, but to present our requests to God, trusting Him to act. The peace that comes from trusting God guards our hearts and minds and allows joy to flow naturally. When you relinquish worry, you remove the block that prevents joy from entering. You create space in your heart for gratitude, contentment, and the awareness of God's blessings. The danger of worry is that it often magnifies problems while minimizing God's power. When you worry, small obstacles feel insurmountable and challenges appear overwhelming. Meanwhile, God's ability to intervene, provide solutions, and orchestrate outcomes is minimized in your perception. You focus on the problem instead of the provider. You focus on fear instead of faith. Worry shifts your perspective, and in doing so, it blinds you to the miraculous opportunities, divine guidance, and blessings already positioned to manifest in your life. The very act of worrying can prevent you from taking the steps necessary to receive those blessings because your mind is trapped in fear rather than action aligned with God's will. Breaking free from worry is a matter of conscious choice. You must recognize the thief, acknowledge its presence, and intentionally redirect your focus toward God. This begins with surrender, handing over your concerns, fears, and uncertainties to Him. It continues with faith-filled action, trusting that God is working even when you cannot see the outcome. And it is reinforced through gratitude, prayer, and meditation on God's promises. Every moment spent worrying is a moment wasted, but every moment spent trusting is an opportunity to experience peace and open yourself to blessings. When you give God your burdens, you also restore your ability to rejoice in life. Joy is not the absence of challenges. It is the presence of God's peace and provision despite challenges. You can face storms, financial uncertainty, or personal trials without being consumed by them. Worry clouds your heart, but trust illuminates it. When you release anxiety, you allow God to fill your heart with His light, love, and guidance. You begin to notice the small miracles, relationships mending, doors opening, wisdom arriving, opportunities appearing. What worry blocks, gratitude and faith unlock? Ultimately, worry is a form of control. It is an attempt to direct life according to our own understanding rather than trusting God's plan. Every time we try to micromanage our future through fear, we hinder God's provision. By contrast, giving it to God, stopping worry, and focusing on His faithfulness positions us to receive the blessings already prepared for us. The joy, peace, and fulfillment we seek are not found in controlling outcomes or solving problems ourselves. They are found in surrendering control to God and trusting Him fully. When we do this, we break free from the weight of worry, experience true joy, and open ours to the abundant blessings that God has waiting. Worry steals joy and blocks blessings, but surrender restores both. The choice is simple yet powerful. Continue carrying anxiety and miss what God has in store, or release your concerns, trust His plan, and embrace the peace and joy that flow from a heart fully surrendered. When you understand this, your perspective shifts, your faith grows, and your life becomes a fertile ground for God's miraculous provision and abundant blessings. Faith is not a one-time decision. It is not a single declaration or a momentary feeling of belief. True faith is a moment-by-moment choice, a deliberate act of the will that you exercise continuously throughout the day, especially in the face of challenges, doubts, and uncertainty. Life will always present situations that test your confidence, situations that tempt you to rely on your own understanding rather than God's wisdom. But faith is the bridge between fear and freedom, between worry and peace. It is the decision to trust God again and again, even when your circumstances scream otherwise, even when your emotions waver, and even when the path forward seems unclear. Each moment you choose to trust, you are reinforcing a pattern of faith that becomes stronger over time, shaping the way you live, think, and act. Many people believe that faith is a passive state, something that simply exists if you are spiritual enough or if you feel it strongly enough. But in reality, faith is active. It requires conscious engagement, a daily decision to hand over control to God rather than trying to micromanage every outcome yourself. Proverbs 3:5-6 says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to Him, and He will make your path straight." Notice that the verse emphasizes all your heart and all your ways. Faith is not selective. It is total. It is a continual commitment to trust God in every area of your life, not just the parts that are convenient or easy. The moment-by-moment nature of faith means that even when doubt, fear or worry creep in, you can make a conscious choice to realign your heart with God's promises and power. Life's challenges are the proving ground for this kind of faith. When you are facing financial strain, health concerns, or broken relationships, your mind will naturally search for solutions, worry about outcomes, and anticipate worst-case scenarios. This is normal. It is human nature to try to control what feels out of control. But faith interrupts this natural tendency by shifting focus from the problem to the provider. It reminds you that you are not alone, that God is infinitely greater than any obstacle, and that he is working even when you cannot see the results. Choosing faith in these moments is not easy, and it often requires repetition. Each time you redirect your thoughts from worry to trust, you're exercising your spiritual muscles, strengthening your ability to rely on God regardless of circumstances. Faith as a moment-by-moment choice also recognizes the dynamic nature of life. Circumstances change constantly. People act unpredictably, and problems can appear to multiply overnight. If faith were a one-time declaration, it would quickly be challenged and rendered ineffective in the face of new trials. But because faith is ongoing, it is flexible and resilient. Each moment presents a new opportunity to choose trust over fear, hope over anxiety, and God's guidance over human reasoning. Even when setbacks occur, even when outcomes differ from your expectations, your continual choice of faith ensures that your heart remains anchored, your mind remains focused, and your spirit remains peaceful. Consider the example of the disciples when they faced a storm while in a boat with Jesus. The wind and waves were terrifying, and their natural response was panic. But Jesus asked them, "Why are you afraid? Do you still have no faith?" In that moment, they were given a choice to focus on the storm and succumb to fear, or to focus on him and trust his power. Faith is precisely that, an active choice in the midst of uncertainty. It is a decision that must be made repeatedly because life will constantly challenge your confidence in God. Each choice strengthens the pattern of trust, gradually transforming your mindset so that faith becomes the default response rather than fear. The moment-by-moment aspect of faith also highlights the importance of a wareen, SS, and intentionality. You cannot rely on automatic faith or passive belief. You must recognize when worry or doubt arises and deliberately redirect your attention to God. This can be done through prayer, meditation on Scripture, speaking declarations of trust, or simply pausing to remind yourself of God's promises. Each of these actions reinforces your choice to place faith above fear, trust above worry, and hope above anxiety. Over time, these repeated acts of conscious faith create a resilient spiritual life that can withstand storms, disappointments, and uncertainties without being shaken. Faith is also contagious and generative. When you consistently choose trust in God, your confidence can influence others around you. People notice when you remain calm in the midst of crises, when you act with clarity despite uncertainty, and when you walk with peace even in challenging circumstances. Your moment-by-moment choice of faith becomes a testimony, inspiring others to rely on God rather than their own understanding or strength. In this way, faith multiplies, touching lives beyond your own and creating a ripple effect of trust and hope. Ultimately, understanding that faith is a moment-by-moment choice empowers you to live with freedom. You are no longer at the mercy of fleeting emotions, circumstances, or fears. Each moment becomes an opportunity to choose God's peace over anxiety, his guidance over confusion, and his promises over doubt. Life's uncertainties are no longer paralyzing because you have a practiced pattern of trust that carries you forward. Faith becomes a lifestyle, not just a momentary feeling, and through it, you experience the profound truth that God is always in control, always faithful, and always working for your good. Faith is a choice you make repeatedly, intentionally, and consciously. It is the active refusal to let fear and worry dictate your responses. It is the ongoing decision to place your trust in God no matter what you face. When you live this way, moment by moment, your life is transformed. Your perspective shifts, your peace grows, and your relationship with God deepens. The power of faith is not in a single declaration. It is in every choice you make to trust him again and again, every day, every hour, and even every minute. Many people mistake worry for responsibility. They assume that to be responsible, they must anticipate every possible outcome, plan for every contingency, and carry every burden themselves. They believe that worrying about the future, obsessing over problems, and feeling anxious about potential failures is a mark of diligence or seriousness. But worry is not responsibility. Worry is fear disguised as action. It is a mental and emotional effort that produces nothing but exhaustion, stress, and distraction. True responsibility, by contrast, is faith-filled action. It is doing what you can with the energy, wisdom, and guidance God provides while leaving the uncontrollable outcomes in high S hands. Understanding this distinction is essential to living a life of peace, purpose, and effectiveness. Responsibility involves action, but action informed by trust rather than fear. Worry attempts to control outcomes that only God can control. It tries to micromanage life, overthinking every scenario and predicting every challenge. But in doing so, worry steals your energy and paralyzes your effectiveness. Consider a farmer who is worried about whether the seeds will grow. Worrying does not make the seeds sprout, does not water them, does not provide sunlight. It does nothing. Responsibility, on the other hand, involves planting the seeds, watering them, tending to the soil, and trusting that nature and God's provision will bring growth. Faithful action, guided by God, accomplishes what worry never can. The distinction between worry and responsible action is also seen in the story of the Apostle Paul. Paul faced countless obstacles, imprisonment, persecution, shipwrecks, and opposition at every turn. Yet he never allowed worry to paralyze him. He took faithful, deliberate action, preaching, teaching, and encouraging the church while trusting God with the outcomes. He recognized his role was to act faithfully, and God's role was to work through his efforts to bring about results. This mindset allowed him to operate with clarity, courage, and purpose, even when the path was difficult or uncertain. Every time we confuse worry with responsibility, we miss the opportunity to act with the same effectiveness, clarity, and peace. Responsibility rooted in faithful action requires discernment. It requires asking, what can I do right now that aligns with God's will? Rather than how can I control everything? Worry focuses on outcomes we cannot control. Faith-filled responsibility focuses on actions we can take in alignment with God's guidance. For example, if you are facing a financial challenge, worry might keep you awake at night, stressing about bills, imagining worst-case scenarios, and mentally exhausting yourself. Faithful action, however, might include creating a budget, seeking opportunities for additional income, praying for God's provision, and trusting Him with what you cannot change. The energy and clarity invested in action produce results. The energy wasted on worry produces nothing but anxiety. It is also important to recognize that responsibility and worry operate on different principles. Worry operates on fear, fear of failure, fear of loss, fear of the unknown. Responsibility operates on trust, trust in God's provision, trust in His wisdom, and trust that your actions done faithfully will produce fruit according to His plan. By replacing fear-driven worry with trust-driven action, you become productive, focused, and free from the paralyzing weight of anxiety. The very act of engaging in faithful action creates a sense of purpose and confidence that worry can never provide. Another critical aspect of understanding responsibility as action rather than worry is recognizing God's partnership. Faithful action acknowledges that while we are called to work, God is the one who ultimately controls the outcomes. Proverbs 16:3 says, "Commit to the Lord whatever you do, and He will establish your plans." Committing your actions to God allows you to act responsibly without succumbing to fear. You are doing your part, but you are not burdened with carrying the weight of the results. Worry, by contrast, treats the outcomes as solely your responsibility, which leads to exhaustion, frustration, and often paralysis. Faithful action also encourages consistency and perseverance. When you act responsibly, you create momentum. Small, intentional steps repeated over time lead to progress, growth, and transformation. Worry, on the other hand, is stagnant. It drains energy without producing movement. Action produces results, builds confidence, and strengthens your trust in God. It is a practical expression of faith, showing that you believe God is active and working and that your role is to cooperate with His plan. Every step you take in alignment with God's guidance is a step toward solutions, breakthroughs, and blessings, whereas worry produces only mental and emotional fatigue. Responsibility as faithful action also protects your heart and mind. Worry fosters fear, doubt, and anxiety, which can cloud judgment and prevent decisive action. Faithful action replaces fear with clarity and focus. It allows you to address problems proactively rather than reactively, to make decisions from a place of wisdom and peace rather than panic. It empowers you to act boldly and confidently, knowing that God is guiding your efforts and orchestrating the results. Ultimately, understanding that responsibility is faithful action rather than worry transforms the way you live. You no longer feel the burden of carrying outcomes that belong to God. You stop exhausting yourself over problems that only He can solve. You focus your energy where it matters, on the actions and choices you are called to make, and you trust God with the rest. Life becomes more productive, purposeful, and peaceful. Your efforts become more effective. Your decisions become wiser, and your heart becomes lighter. Faithful action is responsibility in its highest form. It is intentional, deliberate, and guided by trust in God rather than fear of outcomes. It produces results, strengthens faith, and protects your joy. Worry produces nothing but exhaustion and stress. Every time you replace anxiety with action, you step closer to peace, clarity, and divine provision. Responsibility is not worry, it is faithful action. And embracing this principle unlocks freedom, power, and effectiveness in every area of life. Life has a way of piling up burdens, responsibilities, and fears that seem impossible to carry alone. The bills, the relationships, the health concerns, the career uncertainties, they all press down on your mind, creating a constant sense of tension and anxiety. In moments like these, it's easy to forget that God has provided a powerful tool for releasing these burdens, prayer. Prayer is not just a ritual or a routine. It is a deliberate daily practice of handing G over your worries, fears, and challenges to God. It is a spiritual discipline that allows you to release what you cannot control, trust in God's wisdom, and receive His peace. When practiced consistently, prayer becomes a lifeline, a rhythm of release that transforms worry into faith and chaos into clarity. Prayer as a practice of release begins with recognition. You must first acknowledge the burdens you are carrying. What is weighing on your heart today? What thoughts keep you awake at night? What problems replay in your mind endlessly? The act of identifying these burdens is the first step toward releasing them. Just as a patient must admit pain before healing can begin, the soul must recognize its anxieties before God can bring peace. When you name your burdens in prayer, you are taking the first step toward transferring responsibility from your own shoulders to God's capable hands. The next step is surrender. Prayer is not merely asking God to help, it is intentionally giving the situation to Him. You are saying, in effect, God, I cannot carry this alone. I trust you to handle it. I release it to your care. This is a profound act of faith because it requires letting go of the illusion of control. You may not know how God will work, when He will act, or what the outcome will be. Yet through prayer, you acknowledge that His wisdom, timing, and power are far greater than your own. In that moment of surrender, you experience the first taste of freedom, the mental and spiritual relief that comes from no longer trying to carry what God never intended for you to carry. Consistency is key in making prayer a daily practice of release. It cannot be a one-time event or an occasional activity only when life becomes overwhelming. Daily prayer trains your mind and heart to release worry habitually rather than allowing it to accumulate. Just as physical exercise strengthens muscles, repeated acts of prayer strengthen your spiritual discipline, making it instinctive to hand over burdens rather than obsess over them. Each day becomes an opportunity to practice trust, align with God's will, and create space in your life for peace and clarity. The more consistent you are, the more natural it becomes to respond to stress and challenges with prayer instead of panic. Prayer as release also requires honesty. God does not want your rehearsed words or polished requests. He wants the reality of your heart. Speak openly about your fears, doubts, and frustrations. Let God see the burden exactly as it is without hiding or minimizing it. Psalm 34:17-18 reminds us that the righteous cry out and the Lord hears them. He delivers them from all their troubles. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. Honest prayer invites God's intervention because it acknowledges your dependence on Him. It is in these moments of vulnerability you discover His presence, His guidance, and His peace in ways that mere human effort cannot provide. Another essential aspect of prayer is release is gratitude. Before, during, and after presenting your request to God, Practice thanksgiving. Thank him for what he has already done, for his faithfulness, and for his promises. Gratitude shifts your perspective from focusing solely on the problem to recognizing God's ongoing provision. It reinforces trust and reminds your heart that God is already at work, even if the resolution has not yet appeared. Combining release with gratitude is a powerful spiritual habit. It transforms anxiety into hope and fear into expectation. Prayer is not just about asking for God's help. It is about aligning your heart with his will. When you make prayer a daily practice, you begin to discern his guidance more clearly. Your actions, decisions, and thoughts become more attuned to his purpose. Worry diminishes because you are no longer trying to control every outcome. Instead, you act in cooperation with God's plan. The act of daily release through prayer protects your mind from the constant churn of fear and opens your heart to divine clarity and direction. Moreover, prayer as a daily practice of release has compounding effects. Each day you release burdens, you experience peace, and that peace accumulates. Over time, your mind becomes trained to respond to challenges with calm, your heart becomes resilient, and your life begins to operate from a foundation of trust rather than fear. This rhythm of release transforms your entire approach to life, making worry less compelling and faith more instinctive. You no longer feel trapped by the weight of uncertainty because you have a reliable method for handing it over to God. Ultimately, prayer as a daily practice of release is about partnership with God. You do what you can in the present moment and you trust him with the outcome. It is the daily act of turning over your burdens, letting go of control, and opening your heart to his guidance and provision. By practicing prayer consistently, you create a rhythm of freedom in your life, a spiritual habit that transforms worry into peace, fear into trust, and chaos into clarity. The power of prayer is not just in the words you speak, but in the intentional act of releasing what you cannot carry alone. Daily prayer trains your heart to let go, strengthens your trust in God, and positions you to experience his provision fully. It is not a last resort, it is a first response. Each time you practice it, you are making a choice to live in peace rather than fear, to act in faith rather than panic, and to trust God with the outcomes beyond your control. Prayer as a daily practice of release is the key to a life free from worry, full of joy, and open to the blessings God has prepared for you. There is a profound truth that many people overlook. Miracles cannot coexist with worry. Worry consumes the mind, saturates the heart with fear, and creates barriers between us and God's supernatural provision. When we focus on anxiety, we are focusing on the problem rather than the provider. The energy that should be spent trusting, praising, and acting in alignment with God's will is instead wasted on imagining worst-case scenarios. This is why the act of stopping worry is not just a mental relief. It is a spiritual necessity. Miracles begin to unfold the moment you release your fears and trust in God's power. It is in the space of surrendered faith where worry is removed that divine intervention becomes possible. The first step to experiencing miracles is recognizing that worry is an obstacle. Worry tells you that you must control the outcome, that everything depends on your effort, your reasoning, and your ability to predict the future. But God operates beyond human logic. Miracles are not a product of planning, calculation, or anxiety. They are the result of God's intervention in circumstances that are beyond natural explanation. When your mind is consumed with fear, it cannot perceive the opportunities, guidance, or solutions that God is ready to provide. Worry blinds you to his work. Releasing it is the first step T. Our seeing the miraculous unfold. Scripture offers countless examples of this principle in action. Consider the story of Peter walking on water. The moment he focused on the storm, the wind, the waves, the impossibility of the situation, he began to sink. His faith had to be fixed entirely on Jesus. As long as worry and fear dominated his thoughts, the miracle could not sustain him. The lesson is clear. Miracles require a shift in focus. When we stop worrying, we redirect our attention to God's power, his presence, and his promises. This shift creates conditions necessary for divine breakthroughs, unexpected solutions, and outcomes that defy human understanding. Stopping worry also opens the door for faith to act. Faith and worry cannot occupy the same space. They are mutually exclusive. Anxiety is fear in disguise, and fear suppresses trust. When you surrender worry to God, you create room for faith to flourish. Philippians 4:6-7 teaches us to present our requests to God through prayer and thanksgiving. And as a result, the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, guards our hearts and minds. This peace is not passive. It is the fertile ground in which miracles take root. Without removing worry, faith cannot fully operate. Miracles by nature require faith, a trust in God that goes beyond what we can see, control, or understand. Another reason miracles unfold when we stop worrying is that worry often leads to inaction. Anxiety can paralyze the mind, making us hesitant to take steps that God has already prepared for us to take. We wait, we hesitate, we overthink. Meanwhile, God's provision is ready, but our fear blocks our access. When we stop worrying, we free ourselves to act in alignment with God's will. Opportunities become visible, inspiration becomes clearer, and steps that were once hidden in doubt now emerge with clarity. Miracles often require our cooperation. God provides, but we must move with faith. Worry prevents that movement, while trust propels it. Miracles also require expectancy. When you stop worrying, you begin to expect God to act on your behalf. This expectation is not arrogance. It is confident anticipation based on his faithfulness and power. Expectant faith aligns your heart with God's supernatural ability to intervene. You begin to notice the small, seemingly ordinary moments where his hand is at work, and you become sensitive to opportunities that could lead to larger breakthroughs. Worry clouds your vision, but releasing it sharpens your perception, allowing you to recognize the miraculous unfolding all around you. Many people fail to experience miracles because they try to control outcomes through human effort, thinking that their worry will somehow force results. But God's ways are higher than our ways, and his methods often defy logic. Miracles require surrender, trust, and the courage to let go. When you stop worrying, you acknowledge that God is sovereign, that his plan is perfect, and that your role is to act faithfully while leaving results in his hands. This combination of surrender and action creates the perfect environment for divine intervention. The final key point is that stopping worry does not only allow for external miracles, it also transforms your inner life. Peace, joy, and clarity are themselves miraculous. They are signs of God's presence working within you. As you release worry, your mind becomes calmer, your heart becomes lighter, and your spirit becomes receptive to guidance. This inner transformation is just as important as any external breakthrough because it positions you to receive, recognize, and respond to the miracles God sends. Ultimately, miracles unfold when you stop worrying because worry is a barrier, faith is a prerequisite, action is required, and expectation must be cultivated. When you release fear, trust God, and act in alignment with his will, his power can move freely in your life. The storms that seemed insurmountable become opportunities for his glory. The doors that seemed closed swing open. Relationships are restored, finances are provided, dreams are fulfilled, and the impossible becomes possible. Miracles are not delayed because God is unwilling. They are delayed because worry has blocked the pathway. Let go, trust him, and watch as the miraculous unfolds. Stopping worry is not easy, but it is transformative. Each moment you release fear and place your trust in God, you step into the rhythm of faith, the flow of divine provision, and the reality of his miraculous power. Every burden handed over, every anxious thought replaced with trust, and every step taken in faith clears the path for God's intervention. Miracles are not reserved for a few. They are available to all who are willing to release worry, act faithfully, and trust the God who is greater than every problem, every fear, and every challenge.